there are fates worse than death in the grim darkness of the far future. For the Chaos Space Marines of the World Eaters Legion, being interred within a Helbrute already represents one of the most horrific destinies imaginable. The warrior, broken beyond the ability of even chaos surgery to repair, finds himself sealed within a sarcophagus of metal and ceramite, his ruined flesh fused with the machine that will become both his prison and his weapon for the rest of his tormented existence. But what happens when such a creature, already damned and driven to madness by the whispers of the warp and the agony of entombment, falls into the hands of the Orks? What fresh horrors await when the greenskins decide that this bellowing engine of destruction would make a proper addition to their collection of looted war machines? To understand the full scope of this nightmare, we must first understand what a Helbrute truly is. We must comprehend the nature of the World Eaters, those blood-soaked servants of Horn who have long since abandoned any pretense of honor or nobility. And we must delve into the peculiar genius of the Orks, whose approach to technology combines instinctive brilliance with a complete disregard for anything resembling proper procedure or respect for the original design. Only then can we begin to grasp the horrifying transformation that occurs when these three elements collide on the battlefields of the 41st millennium. A Helbrute is not simply a Chaos Space Marine dreadnought. While it shares superficial similarities with its loyalist counterparts, the corruption of the warp has transformed it into something far more terrible. Where Imperial dreadnoughts are revered as honored ancients, walking tombs for heroes who continue to serve their chapter, even in death, a Helbrute is viewed with a mixture of fear and disdain, even by its fellow Chaos Space Marines. The machine itself has been corrupted by prolonged exposure to warp energies, its metal warping and flowing in ways that suggest organic growth rather than mechanical construction. Spikes of blackened iron erupt from armor plating. Faces seem to form and dissolve in the metal surfaces. The weapon systems, while functionally devastating, appear more like the limbs of some monstrous creature than the tools of war. But the true horror of the Helbrute lies within, in the sarcophagus that houses what remains of the pilot. The Chaos Space Marine interred within the machine has undergone a transformation that goes beyond mere physical integration with his war engine. Over time, measured in decades or even centuries, the flesh of the pilot begins to merge with the metal of the machine in ways that defy natural law. Nerves splice themselves into circuitry. Muscle tissue wraps around hydraulic cables. Bone fuses with adamantium struts. The boundary between man and machine blurs and then dissolves entirely until it becomes impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. For a World Eater's Helbrute, this nightmarish fusion is compounded by the specific nature of their legion's curse. The World Eaters, followers of the blood god Khorne, are already halfway to madness even before their internment. Every warrior of the legion has been subjected to the implantation of the butcher's nails, crude neural implants that amplify aggression while slowly destroying the higher reasoning centers of the brain. These devices flood the nervous system with stimulants and rage-inducing chemicals whenever the wearer engages in violence, creating an addiction to combat that can never be truly satisfied. For a World Eater's Space Marine, battle is not simply a duty or even a calling. It is a physical need, as consuming and undeniable as hunger or thirst. Now imagine what happens when such a warrior is sealed within a Helbrute. The butcher's nails remain functional, still firing their chemical cocktail into a nervous system that has become inextricably entwined with machinery. The rage that once drove the warrior to feats of terrible glory on the battlefield now has no natural outlet when the Helbrute lies dormant between engagements. The pilot exists in a state of perpetual fury, unable to move, unable to fight, unable to die. The madness that afflicts all Helbrute pilots is amplified tenfold in a World Eater's warrior, creating a creature of such consuming rage that it must be chained like a beast when not actively deployed in combat. The World Eater's Helbrute represents the pinnacle of aggressive walkers in chaos armies. These machines move with surprising speed for their bulk, crossing the battlefield at 9 inches of ground-shaking advance that puts them ahead of many other Helbrute variants. They carry an arsenal designed for one purpose only: to kill everything within reach as quickly and brutally as possible. A typical World Eater's Helbrute might sport a Helbrute fist capable of crushing Space Marine armor like tinfoil, paired with EMT's power scourge that can lash out to rend multiple enemies with each strike. The machines bristle with ranged weapons as well, from plasma cannons that can reduce infantry to superheated vapor to missile launchers that bring anti-armor capability to complement their terrifying melee potential. But what truly sets the World Eater's Helbrute apart is its special frenzy ability. When attacked, whether by ranged fire or in close combat, the Helbrute can immediately respond, shooting or fighting back as if it were its own phase of battle. This represents the uncontrollable rage of the pilot within, who cannot help but lash out at anything that dares to strike at him. Combined with the World Eater's faction ability that grants bonuses when charging into combat, these machines become whirling engines of destruction that grow more dangerous with every blow they receive. The more damage a World Eater's Helbrute sustains, the more violent and unpredictable it becomes, attacking with such ferocity that it sometimes cannot distinguish between friend and foe in its bloodlust. This, then, is what the Orks might encounter on a battlefield where they clash with the World Eaters. A towering war machine standing several times the height of a man, wreathed in smoke and the stench of blood, bellowing challenges that mix mechanical distortion with very human screams of rage. Its weapons blazing with fire and fury as it carves a path through enemy formations, leaving broken bodies and scorched earth in its wake. To any rational observer, such a creature would inspire terror and caution. The Orks, however, are anything but rational. The Orks are a race engineered by the ancient Old Ones as weapons in their war against the Necrons and their star vampire gods. The Greenskins were designed to be the perfect soldiers, aggressive, resilient, capable of rapid reproduction, and possessed of an instinctive understanding of warfare and technology. But the Old Ones are long gone, and their weapons have been running wild across the galaxy for millions of years, evolving and adapting in ways their creators never intended. Central to understanding how Orks interact with technology is understanding the Mech Boys, the engineer caste of Ork society. Mech Boys are not trained in their craft. They do not attend schools or study under masters, at least not in any sense that other races would recognize. Instead, their knowledge is genetic, encoded into their very DNA by the Old Ones millennia ago. A Mech Boy emerges from the fungal spores that give birth to Orks already knowing, at an instinctive level, how to build, repair, and modify machinery. This knowledge is not conscious or organized. Ask a Mech Boy how a particular device works, and he will be unable to explain it in any coherent way. But give him a pile of scrap metal and watch as his hands move with surprising dexterity, sorting components, welding joints, and assembling something that by all rights should not function, but somehow does. The secret to Ork technology lies in the unique psychic field that all Orks generate collectively. This wah energy, as it is known, subtly bends reality to conform to Ork expectations. If enough Orks believe that red vehicles go faster, then red vehicles will indeed move more quickly when driven by Orks. If an Ork gun is assembled from parts that do not quite fit together properly, the wah field will smooth over the gaps and contradictions, allowing it to fire, despite lacking several components that more advanced races would consider essential. This is not to say that Ork technology is purely psychic. The machines they build have genuine mechanical function, and many have been captured and studied by the Adeptus Mechanicus. But there is always an element of the inexplicable, a quality that suggests the devices work as much through belief and expectation as through proper engineering principles. Mech Boys are absolutely essential to Ork society. Without them, the vehicles that Ork hordes depend on would grind to a halt. The weapons that allow them to fight would fall silent. The ships that carry them between the stars would drift dead in the void. As such, mech boys occupy a privileged position in the rough hierarchy of greenskin culture. They can command respect and resources that would be denied to ordinary orc boys. The most talented and powerful mech boys become big mechs, leaders in their own right, who can amass followings and even challenge war bosses for dominance if they grow large and clever enough. But more important than their political position is their role in the uniquely orc practice of looting. To the orcs, every battlefield is a treasure trove of potential salvage. Enemy vehicles, weapons, even entire fortifications can be claimed and repurposed for orc use. The process is not gentle or respectful of the original design. Orc looters, specialized warriors dedicated to scavenging, will haul damaged or abandoned enemy equipment back to their workshops, often in the midst of ongoing combat. There, mech boys will set to work with their characteristic enthusiasm, hammering, welding, and bolting new components onto the captured hardware until it bears only the most superficial resemblance to its original form. Looted wagons, as these vehicles are called, come in endless varieties. An Imperial rhino transport might be stripped of its sacred iconography, painted in garish orc colors, fitted with more guns than it was ever designed to carry, and sent back into battle with a crew of bellowing orcs hanging from every surface. A Tau hammerhead might have its sophisticated targeting systems ripped out and replaced with a simple point-and-shoot mechanism that an orc can understand, while extra armor plating gets welded over every surface until the vehicle looks more like a mobile fortress than a skimmer. Even towering war machines like Imperial knights have fallen into orc hands and been converted into something between a gargant and a scrap heap, bristling with every weapon the local mech boy could bolt on. The orcs have no particular reverence for the equipment they capture. To them, the sophisticated technology of the Imperium or the elegant craftsmanship of the Eldar is simply raw material to be hammered into a proper orc configuration. If a system is too complicated or too un-orky in its function, it will be ripped out and replaced with something simpler, louder, and more likely to explode spectacularly. The paint job alone is often enough to make former owners weep, as sacred colors and heraldry are covered over with crude representations of orc glyphs, checkerboard patterns, and vast amounts of red paint. Because as every orc knows, the red ones go faster. What makes this process work, despite its apparent haphazardness, is the combination of the mech boys' instinctive understanding and the psychic field generated by the War. When a mech boy looks at a piece of captured equipment, some part of his genetically encoded knowledge allows him to grasp its function, even if he could not articulate that understanding in words. His modifications, while crude, generally preserve or even enhance the core capabilities of the device. And the collective belief of the orcs using the equipment helps to smooth over any technical shortcomings, allowing a badly modified engine to run or a poorly aligned weapon to fire with shocking accuracy. It is into this context of enthusiastic, destructive, utterly irreverent technological scavenging that a disabled World Eater's Helbrute might fall. And that is where our true story begins. The capture of a Helbrute is no simple matter. These are formidable war machines piloted by some of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, even in their diminished and maddened state. But the orcs, for all their apparent lack of sophistication, are not to be underestimated as warriors. An orc, Wah, represents one of the most dangerous military forces in the galaxy, capable of overwhelming even the most prepared defenses through sheer weight of numbers, ferocity, and unpredictable tactics. Picture, if you will, a battlefield somewhere in the Imperium Nihilus, that dark half of the galaxy cut off by the Great Rift. A World Eater's warband has descended upon an Imperial world, seeking skulls for the Skull Throne and blood for the Blood God. Their assault has been characteristically brutal, with squads of Khorne berserkers tearing through defenders, while Helbrutes stride forward as walking fortresses of rage and firepower. Among them is a particularly ancient Helbrute, a warrior who has served Khorne for centuries. his original name long since forgotten in the madness that consumes him. His machine bears the scars of countless battles, its armor pitted and scorched, but still functional, still deadly. But the World Eaters are not the only Xenos threat to this world. An Ork, Wah, has been building in the neighboring systems, and the war boss leading. It has decided that this particular planet looks like it would provide a proper fight. The greenskins arrive in their characteristic fashion, with orbit-to-surface bombardments that are only slightly more controlled than meteorite impacts, followed by waves of Ork warriors eager to get stuck into the fighting. The battle that results is a three-way slaughter of epic proportions, the kind of carnage that will be remembered in Imperial records as a catastrophic failure of defensive planning, and in Ork legends as "the time we had a proper good scrap with everybody at once." The Imperial defenders, positioned in what their commanders believe to be an unassailable fortress complex, find themselves caught between two nightmares advancing from different directions. From the north, the World Eaters descend like a crimson tide, their berserkers howling battle cries that curdle blood and shatter resolve. These warriors do not simply attack, they savage their opponents with chain axes that never stop screaming, with bolt pistols fired so close that the muzzle flash burns faces, even as the rounds tear through armor. Behind the charging infantry come the Helbrutes, walking fortresses of rage and firepower that level defensive positions with contemptuous ease. From the east, the Orks arrive with rather less subtlety. Their orbital bombardment, if it can be called that, consists largely of repurposed asteroids fitted with crude guidance systems and the hope that they land somewhere near enemy positions rather than friendly ones. The impacts shake the ground like earthquakes, collapsing trenches and burying defenders under tons of displaced earth. Then come the landing craft, which are less craft and more boxes with engines welded on, screaming through the atmosphere with all the grace of falling bricks. Many explode on impact, many more crash land with enough force to injure or kill their passengers. But the Orks pour out of those that survive, howling their own war cries, firing weapons in every direction with enthusiasm that vastly outstrips their accuracy. The Imperial Guard units manning the outer defenses find themselves in the nightmarish position of being attacked from two sides by enemies who hate each other only slightly more than they hate the Imperium. Artillery batteries struggle to decide which threat to prioritize. Heavy weapons teams find their carefully plotted fields of fire suddenly meaningless as enemies approach from unexpected angles. Command and control breaks down as conflicting orders flood the Vox networks, each officer convinced that the threat they can see is more dangerous than the one they cannot. The World Eaters and the Orks, both fixated on violence as their primary mode of interaction with the universe, inevitably come into conflict as they compete for the same targets. A squad of Khorne berserkers, having just finished slaughtering an Imperial heavy weapons position, finds their next objective suddenly blocked by a mob of Ork boys who believe they have just as much right to kill these particular humies. The resulting clash is brief, but spectacularly violent. Chain axes meeting choppers in showers of sparks, bolt rounds punching through Ork flesh, even as Ork shooters turn power armor into Swiss cheese at point-blank range. And in the midst of this maelstrom of violence, bloodshed, and general chaos that would make the gods themselves proud, our ancient Helbrute strides forward. The pilot, lost in the red haze that the butcher's nails have made his permanent state of consciousness, sees only targets. Everything that moves is an enemy. Everything that bleeds can die. The distinction between Imperial Guard, Orks, or even fellow World Eaters becomes meaningless in his fury. He advances, his assault cannon speaking its thunder, his power fist reaching out to crush and tear, a walking embodiment of Khorne's will made manifest in the material universe. The problem, if it can be called that from an outside perspective, is that his aggression has carried him too far forward. In his bloodlust, he has pushed beyond the advance of his fellow World Eaters, pursuing a fleeing Imperial squad into a section of the battlefield that has already been overrun by Orks. When the realization penetrates his battle-maddened brain that he is surrounded, isolated from support, and facing literally hundreds of greenskins who have just noticed him, it is already too late to withdraw. The greenskins swarm over the Helbrute like particularly violent ants discovering a wounded beetle. The comparison is apt, for the Orks attack with the same mindless persistence, the same disregard for individual casualties, and the same collective enthusiasm that characterizes insect behavior elevated to terrifying scale. The first wave consists of basic Ork boys, armed with shooters and sluggers, that they fire with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Their rounds ping off the Helbrute's armor, most of them doing little more than scoring the paint and adding to the collection of battle scars. But volume of fire has a quality all its own, and when hundreds of Orks are shooting at once, some rounds inevitably find weak points. A lucky shot penetrates a joint seal, spilling hydraulic fluid. Another punches through a damaged section of armor plating, severing a control cable. These are pinpricks to the Helbrute, annoying but not seriously threatening. The pilot responds with his assault cannon, the weapon system roaring to life and spewing heavy shells in a wide arc. Orks are reduced to red mist, their bodies literally exploding under the impact of rounds designed to penetrate vehicle armor. Dozens fall in the first burst of fire, but the Orks just keep coming. For every one that dies, two more rush forward to take his place. They climb over the bodies of their fallen comrades without hesitation, using the corpses as stepping stones to get closer to their target. Some of them reach the Helbrute's legs and begin attacking with their choppers, crude melee weapons that are essentially oversized cleavers. Against the thick armor of a Chaos Dreadnought, these weapons are almost comically ineffective. The blows ring off the metal like hammers on an anvil, leaving scratches at best. But the Orks don't care about effectiveness. They care about being in the fight, about having something to hit. And if hitting it doesn't work immediately, well, they'll just keep hitting it until it does. The pilot sweeps his power fist low, the massive weapon system moving with deceptive speed for something so large. Orks are caught in the arc and simply cease to exist, their bodies crushed to paste between tons of empowered ceramite and the ground. The survivors scatter for a moment, then immediately rush back in, howling challenges and insults in their guttural language. The Helbrute takes a step forward, intending to stomp the nearest cluster of greenskins into the ground, when a rocket streaks in from his left and detonates against his hip joint. The explosion is not particularly large by battlefield standards, but the rocket was designed to damage armored vehicles, and it does exactly that. Armor plating buckles. Internal components take shrapnel damage. Warning indicators that the pilot barely understands light up across his sensory feed, informing him in their synthetic way that his mobility has been compromised. He turns to identify the source of this new threat and spots a group of looters, Orks armed with captured or cobbled-together heavy weapons, setting up for another volley. His assault cannon traverses toward them, but before he can fire, another group of Orks, these ones carrying burner weapons, advance into range and let loose with their flamethrowers. The burners are not subtle weapons. They project streams of burning promethium that adhere to whatever they touch and burn hot enough to melt through armor if given enough time. The Orks wielding them advance with the confidence of warriors who know that very few things can survive being set on fire, and they direct their flames at the joints and softer points of the Helbrute's armor. The pilot feels this attack in a way that is difficult to describe. The Helbrute's pain receptors, never fully disconnected even after centuries of madness, transmit sensations that his brain interprets as agony. He can feel the flames eating at his machine body, the same way a man might feel fire on his skin. The butcher's nails respond to this new stimulus by flooding his system with even more rage chemicals, pushing him further into the red haze that has become his permanent state of being. He charges the burners, his damaged hip joint screaming protest with every step, but still functional enough for this final push. His power fist descends on them like the hammer of an angry god, crushing Orks and their weapons together into scrap and meat. But the charge has put him in the midst of even more orcs, and now they attack from all sides. Stick bombs, crude grenades that are more explosive than any reasonable safety margin would allow, arc through the air and detonate against his armor. Each explosion adds to the cumulative damage, weakening seals, cracking plating, severing connections. A particularly clever group of orcs has climbed onto a piece of rubble that puts them at approximately the same height as the Helbrute's head. They leap onto his back, their weight barely noticeable given the mass of the machine, but their presence immediately problematic. They begin attacking his sensor arrays, the optical units that allow him to see, the audio pickups that let him hear. One orc, more ambitious or perhaps more stupid than his fellows, attempts to pry open the access hatch to his sarcophagus, apparently operating under the belief that if you can open up the can, you can get at the meat inside. The pilot tries to shake them off, swinging his arms backward in an attempt to knock the greenskins from his back. He manages to dislodge 2 of them, sending them flying through the air to land with fatal impacts. But the others hang on, gripping armor edges and weapon mounts with the tenacity of barnacles. One of them finally succeeds in jamming his chopper into an optical sensor, the crude blade shattering the reinforced lens and leaving the pilot partially blind on that side. The loss of vision is disorienting, his brain struggling to compensate for the sudden gap in sensory information. More rockets slam into him, these ones targeting his remaining functional leg. The looters have found their range and are methodically working to disable his mobility. Each impact staggers him, forces him to compensate with weight shifts that stress his already damaged systems. He fires his assault cannon at them again, the weapon finally finding its target and reducing the looters to scattered component parts. But there are more orcs behind them, always more orcs, and seemingly endless tide of green flesh and crude weapons that presses in from all sides. The pilot within the Helbrute is lost in a red haze of fury and pain. The butcher's nails are screaming in his brain, flooding his system with so much stimulation that rational thought is impossible. He can feel every impact, every injury to his machine body as if it were happening to flesh. The rage drives him forward, but his damaged systems are failing. Hydraulics seize. Power cells crack and begin to leak. The connection between his consciousness and his war machine grows fuzzy, unreliable. Finally, catastrophically, something vital gives way. Perhaps a lucky orc rocket finds the perfect angle to penetrate into the machine's power core without destroying it entirely. Perhaps concentrated shooter fire finally severs enough critical connections. Whatever the specific cause, the result is the same. The Helbrute crashes to the ground with an impact that shakes the battlefield, its limbs spasming as failing systems trigger random nerve impulses to the pilot within. The machine tries to rise, manages to prop itself up on one arm, then collapses again as that limb goes dead. Most races would write off such a wreck. The Helbrute is clearly beyond immediate repair. Its systems damaged to the point where it would take sophisticated work to restore function. The pilot within, if still alive, would be trapped in his sarcophagus, unable to move or communicate, dependent on increasingly unreliable life support. But the orcs see something different. They see a really big, really killy war machine that just needs a bit of orc ingenuity to get working again. And so, as the battle rages around them, a crew of orcs begins the process of hauling their prize away. The capture itself is a brutal affair. The Helbrute, even disabled, is enormously heavy. Its armor, designed to withstand anti-tank weapons, is too tough to cut through with the tools the orcs have immediately available. So they improvise. Chains are wrapped around limbs and welded to armor plates. A salvaged crane from a looted wagon is brought up, its operator swinging the boom around with more enthusiasm than precision. Orc boys strain at ropes as thick as their arms, pulling and hauling, while mech boy spanners examine the wreck and bark orders that are mostly ignored. Inside his tomb of metal and flesh, the Helbrute pilot experiences a new form of torment. He can hear the orcs working on his machine body, can feel their tools hammering against his armor, their chains being attached to his limbs. The indignity of it wars with his rage. He is a warrior of the world eaters, a servant of the blood god. He has fought across 1,000 battlefields over the centuries of the long war. And now he has been brought down by these crude Xenos, by creatures who treat his sacred war engine as nothing more than salvage to be looted. He tries to access his weapon systems, to make the greenskins pay for their presumption. But the connections are severed or too badly damaged. He tries to activate his vox speakers, to bellow curses and threats. Static and garbled noise emerge, drawing laughter from the Orks, who interpret it as the machine making funny sounds. He is, for perhaps the first time in centuries, truly helpless. And for a warrior, whose entire existence has been defined by violence and dominance, this impotence is a torture that surpasses even the constant pain of his fusion with the machine. The Orks, oblivious to or unconcerned with the consciousness trapped within, continue their salvage operation. Eventually, through a combination of brute force, lucky timing, and one spectacularly large explosion that actually helps more than it hurts, they manage to load the Helbrute onto a flatbed truck that sags alarmingly under the weight. The whole contraption, machine and transport both, is then driven away from the battlefield at a speed that seems inadvisable, given the load, bouncing over terrain that would challenge even properly functioning suspension, heading toward the Ork encampment and the workshops of the mech boys. The journey is its own special nightmare for the trapped pilot. Every impact, every sharp turn, every sudden acceleration or braking sends shockwaves through his damaged frame. His life support is failing, the chemical soup that sustains his ruined flesh growing increasingly toxic as filters crack and seals break. But he cannot die. The combination of chaos corruption, space marine physiology, and the dark god's refusal to release their servants keeps his consciousness burning in the darkness, fully aware, fully suffering. When the Helbrute is finally deposited in the mechboy workshop, dumped unceremoniously onto the ground, with an impact that would have killed a normal man, the real work begins. And it is here that the true nature of what the Orks are about to do begins to manifest in ways that even the darkest imagination might struggle to encompass. The mechboy workshop is a place that defies conventional description. Imagine a vast open area, perhaps once a warehouse or hangar, now transformed into something between a forge, a junkyard, and a charnel house. The ground is covered in a layer of debris so thick that the original surface is no longer visible. Broken parts, stripped gears, shattered armor plates, and unidentifiable mechanical organs lie scattered everywhere. The air is thick with smoke from a dozen different sources: welding torches, vehicle exhausts, burning oil, and the occasional electrical fire that Gretchen rushed to beat out with rags before it spreads to anything important. Towering over this chaos are the vehicles and war machines in various stages of construction or repair. Looted wagons stripped down to their frames await new armor plating and weapon systems. Half-built death dreads stand silent, their weapon arms lying nearby like the severed limbs of metal giants. A truck with no wheels sits propped on blocks, while a team of spanners argues about whether the engine they are trying to install is upside down or backwards. And everywhere, moving through the organized chaos with surprising efficiency, are the Orks themselves. The mech boy in charge of this particular workshop is called Skragnote, though whether that is his original name or simply what the other Orks have taken to calling him is unclear. He is a big mech, identifiable by his size, which makes even other Orks look small by comparison, and by the elaborate collection of tools and weapons he is integrated into his own body. A power claw replaces his right hand, its blades sharp enough to cut through armor plating with a single squeeze. His left arm mounts a custom Mega Blaster, one of the most powerful and dangerously unstable weapons in the Ork arsenal. A crude force field generator is bolted to his back, its projectors crackling with barely contained energy, and his head, wrapped in what might once have been a pilot's helmet, sports an array of optical enhancers that make him look like a particularly ugly insect. Scragnute approaches the downed Helbrute with the air of a connoisseur examining a particularly interesting piece of scrap. He walks around it several times, his optical enhancers whirring and clicking as they focus on different aspects of the machine. Occasionally, he reaches out with his power claw to tap on armor plating or pull at a dangling cable. His assistants, a mob of lesser mech boys and Gretchen, follow behind him, chattering excitedly among themselves about the new prize. "That's a proper big one, boss," one of the spanners observes, stating the obvious in the way that only orcs can. "Looks like one of dem Humy dreadies, but all spiky and chaotic like." Scragnut grunts, a sound that could mean anything from agreement to digestive distress. He prods the Helbrute's sarcophagus with one metal finger, and to his surprise, something responds. A weak electrical current surges through the damaged systems, causing one of the machine's arms to twitch. The gathered orcs jump back instinctively, several of them raising their weapons. But Scragnut laughs, a deep booming sound that echoes through the workshop. "Oi, there's something alive in there," he announces with evident delight. "This ain't just scrap, boys. This is a proper death dread, just built by them chaos gits instead of us. We's gonna fix it up right and proper, and then it's gonna be the killiest thing in the whole wag." The pronouncement is met with enthusiastic cheering from the assembled orcs. Several of them immediately begin arguing about what weapons should be added, what color it should be painted, and whether it needs more spikes or more guns, or ideally both. Scragnut lets them argue for a moment, then bellows for silence, the sound amplified by the Vox grill built into his helmet. "Right then, here's what we's gonna do. First thing, we gotta get this thing open and see what's inside. Might be we can use the pilot, might be we gotta pull him out and put in one of our own. Then we strips out all the fancy chaos rubbish and replaces it with good orky gubbins. Then we adds more guns, cause you can never have enough dakka. Then we paints it red, cause red makes it go faster, and we paint some yellow on it too, cause yellow makes the weapons more killy. And then we takes it out for a test drive and sees how many gits we can stomp." The plan, if such a word can be applied to what is essentially organized chaos, is met with universal approval. Within moments, Gretchen are scurrying around gathering tools, dragging over welding rigs, and clearing enough space around the Helbrute for the mech boys to work. And work they do, with the characteristic orc combination of enthusiasm and complete disregard for proper procedure or safety. The first task is to access the sarcophagus that contains the pilot. This is complicated by the fact that the Helbrute's armor was designed to protect this vital component from enemy fire, making it one of the most heavily reinforced parts of the entire machine. The orcs try several approaches. They try cutting through the armor with industrial saws, only to have the blades dull and break against the chaos-warped metal. They try using a thermal lance, but the heat simply makes the metal glow and warp, rather than cutting through it. One particularly inventive spanner suggests using explosives, which Scragnut actually considers for a moment before deciding that this might damage whatever is inside more than they want. Finally, they discover that one of the access panels has been loosened by battle damage. It takes 6 orcs pulling on a chain wrapped around it, with a 7th hammering on the surrounding metal with a massive wrench. But eventually, the panel tears free with a screech of protesting metal. The opening revealed is barely large enough for a Gretchen to squeeze through, but that proves to be enough. A particularly brave, or perhaps particularly stupid, grot is shoved into the gap, equipped with a lamp and instructions, to poke around and see what's what. What the Gretchen finds inside defies easy description, even by orc standards. The interior of the Helbrute is a nightmare landscape of fused flesh and metal, of organic tissue that has grown into and through mechanical systems, until the two are indistinguishable. Cables that might be nerves or might be wiring snake through the space. Pumps that could be mechanical or could be mutated organs push fluids through tubes. And at the center, suspended in what remains of the amniotic sarcophagus, is the pilot. The grot's screams bring several mech boys to peer in through the opening, their optical enhancers clicking and whirring as they try to make sense of what they are seeing. The pilot is, technically, still alive, though the term stretches the definition to its breaking point. What remains of his original body is a twisted mass of scar tissue, surgical modifications, and warp corruption. The butcher's nails are visible as metal spikes protruding from his skull, pulsing with a faint red light. His limbs, or what can be identified as limbs, have been reduced to stumps that connect directly into the machine's control systems through ports that seem to have grown rather than been installed. Most horrifying of all, he is conscious. His eyes, the only part of him that still looks remotely human, track the Gretchen's movements with an intensity that speaks of awareness and understanding. When one of the mech boys shines a light directly into the chamber, the pilot's mouth, visible through a transparent section of his life support coffin, opens in a silent scream. No sound emerges. His Vox systems are too damaged for that, but the intent is clear. "Well," Scragnut says, after a long moment of consideration. "That's right, proper Orky, that is. Diskit's already halfway to being a deaf dread. We just gotta finish the job." The decision made, the Orks set to work with renewed vigor. If they cannot open the sarcophagus without killing the pilot, then they will simply have to work around it. The life support systems, already failing, are identified and repaired in the Ork fashion. This involves replacing sophisticated medical equipment with whatever the mech boys have on hand. A nutrient recycler from a Gretchen feeding system is bolted in place. A pressure regulator salvaged from a vehicle is wired into the chemical mixture that sustains the pilot's ruined flesh. None of it is properly calibrated or correctly installed, but the field and the desperate will to live of the pilot himself somehow keep the patchwork system functioning. Next comes the question of integrating the pilot's control systems with the Ork modifications they plan to make. The sophisticated neural interfaces that allowed the pilot to control his Helbrute with thought alone are examined with a combination of fascination and confusion. The mech boys poke at the crystalline processors, hold them up to the light, tap them with wrenches to see if they make interesting sounds. One particularly ambitious spanner tries to install one of the processors into a vehicle he's working on, only to have it shatter when he tries to secure it with a sledgehammer. After much discussion, argument, and at least one fistfight over the proper approach, the mech boys decide that the fancy neural interface system is too mucking about with complicated gubbins and needs to be replaced with something that Orks can actually understand and maintain. They settle on a system based on the same technology they use for their own deaf dreads, which is to say, a much cruder approach that favors reliability and simplicity over sophistication and precision. The installation of this new system is, to put it mildly, not gentle. Thick cables, each one about as thick as a human thumb, and wrapped in insulation that smells of burnt rubber and machine oil, are run from the machine's new motor systems directly to what the mech boys identify as the pilot's motor cortex. The process of making these connections requires drilling through portions of the sarcophagus, exposing the pilot's ruined flesh to the workshop air for the first time in decades. The mech boys work with the casual efficiency of mechanics repairing a particularly stubborn engine, pulling aside what they identify as the squishy bits to access the neural tissue underneath. The drilling itself is conducted with a tool that looks like it might have started life as a mining implement before being repurposed for medical use, or possibly vice versa. The pain boy operating it, a grizzled orc with more scars than original skin, approaches the task with the confidence of someone who has performed this procedure dozens of times on Gretchen, destined for killer cans. The fact that he is now working on something far more complex than a grot's simple nervous system does not seem to concern him. A brain is a brain, after all, and if you know where to stick the wires, the rest is just details. Each connection point requires a port to be forcibly created in the pilot's skull, the bone cut away with tools that spray chips of ceramite-hardened bone material across the work area. The The pilot's silent screams continue throughout, his body convulsing against its restraints as nerves are severed and new connections are forced into place. His mouth opens and closes in reflexive agony, but the Vox systems that would allow him to voice his suffering remain offline, leaving him trapped in a private hell of sensation without expression. The mech boys add amplifiers between the neural pickups and the motor systems, crude devices that boost the signal strength at the cost of introducing significant noise into the control pathway. What this means in practice is that the pilot's attempts to move will be amplified, but also distorted, his fine motor control reduced to approximate gestures rather than precise movements. A command to extend his arm at a specific angle will instead result in the arm extending roughly in that direction, with the exact final position determined more by mechanical limits and momentum than by conscious control. Signal processors are added to try to filter out some of the noise, but these are Ork-made devices, which means they work according to Ork principles rather than any reasonable engineering standard. One of them appears to be nothing more than a collection of resistors and capacitors wired together in a configuration that would make an Imperial tech priest weep. Another looks suspiciously like it was salvaged from a vehicle's engine management system and repurposed without any modification whatsoever. Yet somehow, when the system is finally activated and tested, it works. The pilot can move the Helbrute's limbs, can activate its weapon systems, can control its basic functions. The fact that doing so requires him to relearn motor skills he has possessed for centuries, that the control is imprecise and unreliable, that every movement feels wrong in ways he cannot articulate. Well, those are problems for him to deal with, not the mech boys who built the system. The work continues for days, a seemingly endless cycle of modification, testing, failure, more modification, and occasional explosions when something doesn't work quite right. The Helbrute is stripped down to its core frame, every system examined and evaluated according to the particular Ork sense of what is useful. Weapon systems that the mech boys cannot immediately understand are ripped out and tossed onto the scrap heap, joining a growing pile of sophisticated Imperial and Chaos technology that will likely be sold to other Orks for scrap value. The sophisticated targeting computer that allowed the pilot to acquire and track multiple targets simultaneously is pulled out, its crystalline processors carefully removed and then promptly shattered when a spanner drops them while trying to show them to a fellow mech. The pieces are swept aside with a shrug and forgotten. In place of the targeting computer goes a much simpler system: optical sensors, basically cameras with some basic image processing linked directly to the pilot's brain with no computer intermediary. This means the pilot will have to do all the target acquisition and tracking himself, using only his own eyes and brain to identify enemies and calculate firing solutions. For a Chaos Space Marine with centuries of combat experience, this might seem like a reasonable arrangement. But for someone whose neural pathways have been scrambled by the butcher's nails, whose thought processes have been reduced to simple rage-driven impulses, and who is still recovering from having his brain drilled into by Ork tools, the task is far more challenging than it would have been in his previous existence. The Helbrute's original weapons are examined with particular interest, the mech boys running their hands over them with the appreciation of artisans examining fine craftsmanship, even as they prepare to improve it, according to Ork standards. The Power Fist, a massive metal gauntlet capable of generating force fields that can crush battle tank armor like tinfoil, is deemed acceptable in principle, though it needs more choppy bits added to it to make it proper Orky. Scragnut personally oversees the installation of additional blades and spikes, welding them on at angles that please the Ork aesthetic, if not any reasonable engineering principle. Some of the blades are taken from chainsaws, still bearing teeth that rotate when the weapon is powered. Others are simply sharpened pieces of scrap metal, hammered and ground to an edge that is more psychological than practical. The result is a power fist that looks less like a precision instrument and more like something designed to cause maximum trauma through the application of as many sharp edges as possible to a single target area. The assault cannon proves more problematic. Its sophisticated auto-loading mechanism, designed to maintain a high rate of fire while managing heat and ammunition consumption, is too complex for the mech boys to want to maintain. They examine it for about 10 minutes, during which time 3 of them argue about what various components do, while a 4th tries to take it apart, just to see what's inside. After some discussion that devolves into a brief pushing match, they simply decide to replace the entire weapon with an Ork big shooter, a weapon that trades reliability, accuracy, and any pretense of sophistication for the ability to spit out a truly impressive volume of large-caliber rounds as fast as the ammunition feed can supply them. The big shooter is bolted directly to the mounting point where the assault cannon once sat, with no attempt made to match the original mounting specifications or to preserve any of the fire control systems. The ammunition feed is simply a large hopper welded to the Helbrute's back, connected to the weapon by a flexible belt that will probably jam at least once per battle, but can be cleared by simply having a Gretchen climb up and give it a good whack with a wrench. The trigger mechanism is equally crude, essentially a mechanical linkage that the pilot can activate by sending a simple nerve impulse through the control system. No rate limiter, no heat management, no safety interlocks. Just pull the trigger and keep firing until the ammunition runs out or something breaks, whichever comes first. The fact that the recoil will likely tear the mounting apart after extended use is considered a problem for future Orks to deal with, possibly while under fire, possibly while surrounded by enemies, but that's what makes it exciting. But the Orks are not content with simply repairing and replacing. They must improve, must make the machine more Orky. This means adding more weapons, more armor, and more decorative elements that will strike fear into their enemies and make their fellow Orks jealous. A team of spanners begins welding on additional armor plates, scavenged from destroyed vehicles and beaten into approximately the right shape with sledgehammers. These plates are not painted red or yellow as Scragnut ordered. They are not painted at all at first, simply bolted on wherever there seems to be space, the resulting patchwork giving the machine an even more nightmarish appearance than it started with. The weapons additions are where the mech boys really let their creativity run wild. If the machine has space for 2 arms, why not 4? Additional weapon mounts are fabricated from scrap metal and welded onto the chassis at points that the original designers would have considered structurally unsound or simply impossible. One arm gets a rocket launcher, its payload of explosive missiles barely contained in an ammunition hopper that looks like it was made from an old fuel tank. Another gains a scorcher, a flamethrower that burns hot enough to melt through ceramite armor and turn infantry into burning statues. The fact that these weapons will create a nightmarish crossfire of overlapping fire arcs is not seen as a problem, but as a feature. After all, more guns means more dakka, and you can never have too much dakka. Throughout all of this, the pilot remains conscious, experiencing every modification as a violation of both his body and his machine. The crude new control systems force him to relearn how to move, how to fight, in ways that bear only passing resemblance to the sophisticated interface he once commanded. Where before his thoughts translated directly into action, now he must push crude nerve impulses through systems that resist and override his commands with Ork logic. Want to aim carefully at a distant target? Too bad. The new targeting system is calibrated for the Ork preference of point in general, direction, and shoot. Want to move with the fluid grace that once characterized his combat style? Sorry, the Orks have replaced his hydraulics with heavier systems scavenged from industrial equipment, giving him a lurching, thundering gait that rattles every joint and connection. The pain boys, Ork medical specialists, are called in at several points during the modification process. These grotesque figures, festooned with surgical implements of dubious cleanliness and even more dubious purpose, examine the pilot with professional interest. One of them, a particularly accomplished doc called Gutripper, decides that the pilot needs more power and begins installing what he calls stim injectors into the remaining flesh. These crude devices, will pump cocktails of Ork-designed combat drugs directly into the pilot's system, chemicals that were never meant for Space Marine physiology, let alone the modified biology of a Chaos Space Marine. The result is a pharmacological nightmare that battles against the butcher's nails for control of the pilot's nervous system, creating feedback loops of rage and pain that surpass even what he experienced in his original Helbrute configuration. The modifications extend to the spiritual realm as well, though the Orks are unaware of this aspect. A World Eater's Helbrute is not merely a machine with a pilot, it is an artifact of chaos, infused with the power of the warp and marked by the attention of the blood god himself. The corruption that has merged man and machine is not purely physical, but metaphysical, a blending of realities that goes beyond mere engineering. When the Orks begin their crude modifications, they are not simply changing metal and circuits. They are interfering with something that exists partially in the warp itself. The Orks, however, are remarkably resistant to chaos corruption. This is one of the great frustrations of the Dark Gods when dealing with greenskins, where other races can be tempted, corrupted, and turned to serve the ruinous powers. Orks simply remain stubbornly themselves. This is partly due to their genetic engineering by the Old Ones, partly due to the protective effect of their own psychic gestalt, and partly due to the simple fact that Ork minds work so differently from human consciousness that the usual temptations of chaos hold no appeal. Power. Orks already believe they are the most powerful things in the universe. Knowledge? Orks have no interest in learning things they don't already know. Pleasure? Orks get all the pleasure they need from a good fight. Decay? Orks literally grow from fungus and don't fear death. So when Scragnut and his mech boys start hammering away at a chaos artifact, they do so without the taint spreading to them. The spikes that they add to the machine are not symbols of Horn, but simply Orky decoration. The red paint they eventually slather over the entire surface is not the blood red of the World Eaters, but the bright, cheerful red that Orks believe makes things go faster. The skulls that get mounted on the chassis are not offerings to the Skull Throne, but simply trophies from previous fights, chosen because they look intimidating and proper Orky. This creates a surreal situation where two contradictory realities are forced to coexist in the same space. The pilot remains a servant of Khorne, his soul marked by the blood god, his every thought shaped by centuries of worship and violence in the name of chaos. But his body, the machine that has become his body, is being systematically converted into an Ork war engine, covered in Ork symbols, modified according to Ork principles, and anointed with Ork beliefs about how things should work. The metaphysical dissonance is enough to drive an already maddened mind even further into insanity. The pilot tries to resist. In his more lucid moments, he attempts to reassert control over his own machine, to push back against the crude Ork modifications with the force of his will and his connection to the warp. But he is fighting a losing battle. The Orks, in their blunt and straightforward way, are stronger than his will. Every time he tries to reject a modification, to force his machine to rebel against its new masters, the mech boys simply hammer it into compliance, welding new connections, forcing new control pathways, until resistance becomes pointless. There is a moment, about 3 days into the modification process, when something in the pilot breaks. It is not a physical breaking, though there is plenty of that happening to his body. It is a spiritual breaking, a moment when he realizes that he cannot win this fight, cannot escape this fate. He is going to become an Ork war machine. His centuries of service to Khorne, his mountains of skulls taken in the blood god's name, his legendary battles and feared reputation, all of it will be subsumed into this crude mockery of his former glory. He will be painted red and yellow like a children's toy. He will be forced to fight not for Khorne, but for whatever Ork warboss decides to use him, and there is nothing he can do to prevent it. The screaming, when it comes, is audible even through the damaged Vox systems. It echoes through the workshop, a sound of such pure anguish and rage that even the orcs pause in their work to listen. For a moment, there is something almost like respect in their bearing. This is a warrior's cry, the sound of someone who has lost everything but their fury. It is a sound that orcs understand instinctively, even if the context is alien to them. Scragnut walks over to the half-modified Helbrute and places one massive hand on its chassis, almost gently. "That's right, you git," he says, his voice carrying an unusual tone that might almost be sympathy. "Get it all out. You're one of us now, and we's gonna make sure everyone knows it. You're gonna be the biggest, killiest, most proper orky dread in this whole war, and you're gonna love it, even if it kills you." The work continues. Day after day, the transformation progresses. The Helbrute is stripped of its former identity and rebuilt in the orc image. The chapter symbols of the World Eaters, once worn with such pride, are ground away or covered over with orc glyphs. The brass and bronze trim that marked service to Horn is painted over in garish colors. The elegant, if horrifying, fusion of man and machine that chaos had wrought is buried under layers of crude welding and mechanical bolt-ons that have all the subtlety of an orc nob's favorite hammer. Some of the modifications actually improve the machine's capabilities, at least by orc standards. The new rocket launcher gives it anti-armor capability that it lacked before. The additional armor plating, while ugly and poorly distributed, does provide extra protection in key areas. The reinforced joints in the legs, added after the original hydraulics fail completely during a test, actually give the machine more stability when moving over rough terrain. But these improvements come at the cost of refinement, of the careful balance between systems that the original designers had achieved. The Helbrute moves with the subtlety of an avalanche now, announces its presence with the screech of grinding metal and the roar of poorly tuned engines. Stealth is impossible. Grace is a forgotten dream. The paint job, when it finally comes, is the ultimate indignity. Gretchens swarm over the machine with buckets of paint in hand, sloshing the colors on with more enthusiasm than precision. The base coat is red, bright fire engine red that is mixed with some sort of metallic flake that makes it shimmer in the light. Over this go stripes of yellow, applied freehand with no attempt at symmetry or planning. Black and white checkerboard patterns appear on various surfaces, the traditional orc decoration that signals a machine intended for speed and violence. And everywhere, orc glyphs are stenciled or painted on, symbols whose meanings range from "this is the biggest" to "extra killy," to crude representations of how many enemies this machine is expected to kill. But perhaps the most significant addition is the massive orc glyph, painted on the front of the machine's torso, right where the World Eater's symbol once stood. It is the icon of the Warg, the symbol that all orcs know and revere, painted large enough that it can be seen from hundreds of meters away. This is not a request or a suggestion, it is a declaration. This machine belongs to the orcs now. Any former allegiance, any former identity is irrelevant. It is an orc war machine, and it will fight for the Warg, or it will be scrapped for parts. The pilot, experiencing all of this through sensors that are increasingly unreliable and systems that barely respond to his control, reaches a state beyond madness. The butcher's nails continue their work, flooding his system with rage chemicals. The orc combat drugs add their own contribution, a cocktail of stimulants and aggression enhancers that were never meant to mix with Space Marine physiology. The constant pain of his fusion with the machine, always present but now amplified by crude new connections and badly installed implants, provides a baseline of suffering that colors every moment. And over it all, the knowledge that he has been reduced to this, that his glorious service to the blood god has ended not in honorable death, but in conversion to a Xeno war machine, burns in what remains of his mind. If Khorne is aware of what is happening to one of his servants, the blood god gives no sign. Perhaps this is because the pilot, immobilized and unable to take skulls or spill blood, is of no interest to a god who cares only for violence and death. Perhaps it is because the Ork psychic field interferes with the pilot's connection to the warp, making him invisible to divine attention. Or perhaps, most horrifying of all, Khorne is aware and simply does not care, for even this degradation serves the blood god in its way. As the pilot's rage and suffering add to the vast ocean of fury that feeds the chaos god's power. The modifications take nearly 2 weeks to complete, a longer time than the Orks would prefer but necessary, given the complexity of integrating their systems with the chaos technology. When Skragnut finally declares the work finished, the machine that emerges from the workshop bears only superficial resemblance to the World Eater's Helbrute that was dragged in. The profile is similar, yes, the basic bipedal walker design unchanged, but every surface has been modified, every system replaced or augmented, every aspect of the machine redesigned according to Ork principles. The test firing of the weapons is a moment of terror and dark comedy. The big shooter, mounted where the assault cannon once was, opens up with a roar that can be heard across the entire camp. The weapon performs exactly as intended, spitting out hundreds of rounds in a matter of seconds, the tracers painting bright lines across the testing range. The fact that it also showers the surrounding area with hot brass casings, and at one point jams so badly that a Gretchen has to climb onto the machine with a hammer to clear it, is considered acceptable by Ork standards. The rocket launcher proves more problematic. On its first test fire, the rocket achieves the impressive feat of launching backwards, screaming past Skragnut's head close enough that he can feel the heat of its exhaust, before detonating in a storage shed that nobody was using anyway. The second test is more successful, the rocket actually traveling in the direction it was aimed and exploding with satisfying violence against a target. The third test results in the launcher itself exploding, taking off a section of the machine's new armor plating, and requiring 2 hours of repairs before it can be considered functional again. The Scorcher works perfectly, which is either a testament to the simplicity of flamethrower technology or evidence that even Ork modifications cannot ruin something that is essentially just point and watch it burn. The pilot, forced to operate these systems through his crude new control interface, discovers that he retains enough fine motor control to aim and fire the weapons. But the act of doing so feels fundamentally wrong, like trying to write with someone else's hands or speak with a voice that does not belong to you. The movement tests are similarly mixed. The machine can walk, though its gait is heavy and unbalanced, each step accompanied by concerning creaking sounds from the joints and frame. It can run, sort of, managing a lumbering charge that builds impressive momentum, if not impressive speed. It cannot do any of the more complex maneuvers that the pilot remembers from his previous existence. No dodge rolls, no precision footwork, no combat dancing that allowed him to engage multiple targets while minimizing his profile as a target himself. He is a brute force instrument now, designed to advance forward, weather fire through sheer armor and toughness, and deliver overwhelming violence to whatever he reaches in melee range. But the real test, the one that determines whether the machine will be accepted into the Wa or scrapped for its components, is combat. And for that, Skragnut has arranged a proper trial by fire. The chosen proving ground is a battle already in progress between the Orks and Imperial forces that still hold out in a fortified position several kilometers from the main Ork camp. The defenders, a mixed force of Imperial Guard, and a small contingent of Space Marines from a chapter whose colors have been lost under dirt and blood, have established a strong defensive perimeter. Their heavy weapons nests cover all the approaches. Their trenches are deep and well designed. They have artillery support and air cover. By any reasonable military assessment, assaulting such a position would require careful planning, artillery preparation, and combined arms operations to minimize casualties while achieving objectives. The Orks, naturally, have no interest in any of that. Instead, Skragnut simply points his newly modified Helbrute at the defensive line and tells the pilot a simple command that needs no translation: "Go stomp dem gits." The machine, designated Big Stompy by the Orks in a fit of creative naming, lurches forward at what passes for a run. The pilot, trapped in his sarcophagus and connected to systems that barely respond to his commands, has no choice but to obey. But something happens as the machine begins to move, as the systems warm up and the weapons charge and the ground begins to shake under metal feet. The butcher's nails activate, flooding the pilot's system with their familiar chemical rush. The Ork combat drugs add their own contribution, and suddenly, for the first time since his capture, the pilot feels something other than helpless rage. He feels purpose. The Imperial defenders spot Big Stompy when it is still several hundred meters away. Impossible to miss, given its size and the noise it generates. Heavy weapons immediately open fire. Lascannon beams stab out, striking the machine's patchwork armor with devastating force. One beam punches through a newly installed armor plate, the metal vaporizing under the intense energy, exposing internal systems. Another burns a deep furrow across the machine's chest, just missing the sarcophagus by inches. Autocannon rounds hammer into the machine's limbs, each impact staggering it slightly, but failing to halt its advance. The pilot, experiencing the incoming fire through sensors that are both too sensitive and not sensitive enough, reacts with instincts honed over centuries of combat. His conscious mind is a chaos of rage and confusion, but his warrior's instincts are intact. He angles the machine to present its more heavily armored surfaces to the enemy fire. He varies his speed and direction, making himself a harder target, and he returns fire with every weapon at his disposal. The big shooter opens up, its heavy rounds screaming downrange toward the enemy positions. The accuracy is terrible by the standards the pilot remembers from his days as a mortal warrior. But the volume of fire is impressive, and the Ork principle of quantity has a quality all its own, proves valid. Defenders die, cut down by rounds that tear through sandbags and rockcrete with equal ease. The rocket launcher, its previous malfunctions apparently resolved, sends explosive projectiles into the trench line. They detonate with satisfying violence, throwing bodies and equipment into the air. And then Big Stompy reaches the defensive line, and the real slaughter begins. The machine crashes through the first line of trenches like an avalanche given purpose. Its feet, massive metal constructs weighing tons each, come down on defenders who cannot get out of the way fast enough. The power fist, now augmented with Ork spikes and cutting edges, reaches down to grab at heavy weapons positions. A Lascannon emplacement, gun and gunners both, is seized and crushed, the weapon's power pack detonating in a flash of released energy that leaves only scorch marks. The Scorcher plays across a section of trench, the superheated flames consuming everything they touch, turning men into charcoal statues that crumble when touched. The pilot is lost in the violence now, the butcher's nails and the combat drugs combining to create a state of berserker fury that surpasses even what he experienced in his previous existence. Every kill feeds the rage, every death makes him hunger for more. He is a killing machine in the most literal sense, an engine of destruction that cannot stop, will not stop, until everything around him is dead or he himself is destroyed. The Space Marines, recognizing the threat that Big Stompy represents, concentrate their fire on the machine. Melter weapons, designed to destroy vehicles and fortifications, are brought to bear. One shot catches the machine in the hip joint, the intense heat melting through layers of armor and causing catastrophic damage to the leg assembly. Big Stompy stumbles, nearly falls, catches itself with one massive hand that digs furrows in the ground. The pilot forces the damaged leg to move, hydraulic fluid streaming from ruptured lines, metal grinding against metal where bearings have seized. The pain is extraordinary, transmitted through the neural interface with perfect fidelity. But pain is irrelevant. The blood god demands skulls, and this body will provide them until it can move no more. A tactical marine, brave or foolish beyond measure, attempts to plant a crack grenade on Big Stompy's damaged leg. He gets within arm's reach, the explosive armed and ready, when the pilot spots him through the machine's optical sensors. The power fist comes around in a swing that is more instinct than aim, catching the Space Marine and hurling him 50 meters through the air. He hits the ground with an impact that would have killed an unaugmented human, bounces once, and lies still, his armor cracked and leaking fluids. But the Marine's sacrifice was not in vain. The concentrated fire from his squad finally achieves what the battle damage alone could not. A bolt round, fired with exceptional accuracy, or perhaps just exceptional luck, finds its way into one of the gaps in Big Stompy's armor, punching through weakened plating and into the machine's main power distribution node. The explosion is not large by battlefield standards, but it is perfectly positioned to cause maximum damage. Electrical systems throughout the machine fail, weapon systems go dark, servo motors seize, Big Stompy crashes to the ground for the second time in as many weeks, its remaining functional arm unable to catch its weight, its damaged leg finally giving up entirely. The machine lies on its side, smoke pouring from breaches in its armor, fluids leaking from ruptured lines, looking for all the world like a slain beast rather than a sophisticated war machine. The Imperial defenders, battered and bloodied but still functional, begin to advance cautiously toward the fallen machine. Their intent is clear: to plant charges to ensure this monstrosity stays down permanently. They make it perhaps 10 steps before the Orks arrive. The WH has been watching this battle with interest, and Big Stompy's performance, while ending in temporary defeat, has been impressive enough to earn reinforcement. Trucks and wagons loaded with Ork boys roar across the battlefield. Def Dreads, proper Ork constructs piloted by volunteers who wanted to be big and killy, lumber forward to support their newest cousin. And the Orks fall upon the Imperial position with the enthusiasm of greenskins who have just seen a proper good fight and want in on the action. The battle that follows is brief and brutal. The defenders, already depleted by Big Stompy's rampage, cannot hold against a fresh wave of Orks. They fall back toward their secondary positions, fighting a delaying action that costs them dearly. And in the chaos of the retreat, several Ork vehicles surround Big Stompy. Chains are attached, and the machine is dragged clear of the battlefield once more, heading back towards Scragnut's workshop for repairs. The pilot, consciousness fading as his damaged life support struggles to keep him alive, experiences a moment of clarity through the chemical haze and the rage. He has just fought his first battle as an Ork war machine. He is killed in the name of the WH rather than the blood god. He has been painted in Ork colors, modified with Ork technology, used as an Ork weapon. And the worst part, the part that will haunt him for however long his tormented existence continues, is that for those brief moments in combat, when the weapons were firing and the enemies were dying and the violence was pure and simple, he had enjoyed it. This realization is perhaps more devastating than anything the Orks have done to his physical form. He is a warrior of the World Eaters, a servant of Khorne. His entire existence has been defined by violence in service to the blood god. And now, he has killed for another master and found satisfaction in it. The corruption of his body is complete. But this feels like the corruption of his soul, a betrayal of everything he has believed in for centuries. Back in Scragnut's workshop, the repairs take less time than the original modifications. The mech boys have learned where the machine's weaknesses are, know which systems are most likely to fail under stress. The damaged leg is replaced entirely, a new assembly fabricated from parts scavenged from 3 different sources and welded together into something that is more Ork than chaos at this point. The power distribution system gets an overhaul, redundant connections installed so that future failures will be less catastrophic. Additional armor is added to the most vulnerable areas, identified during the battle as anywhere that enemies seemed able to shoot through. And throughout the repairs, Scragnut talks to the machine. Not to the pilot specifically, but to the machine itself, treating it like a temperamental but valued member of his workshop. "You did good out there," he says, while welding a new plate into place. "Killed lots of gits, scared the rest. The boys is already telling stories about Big Stompy and how many Yumis it crumped. You're famous now, you get. You're one of the best dreads in the whole wow. The pilot cannot respond. His Vox systems remain too damaged for speech, but he listens, because what else can he do? And some part of him, buried deep beneath the madness and the rage and the chemical cocktails flooding his system, understands what is happening. He is being domesticated. Not broken, exactly, because the Orks would have no use for a broken war machine, but conditioned, trained, shaped into the weapon they want him to be. Every time he fights for them, every time he kills their enemies and survives, the conditioning is reinforced. And eventually, perhaps soon, the distinction between fighting for the World Eaters and fighting for the Orks will become meaningless. Violence is violence. Death is death. Blood is blood. Does it truly matter in whose name it is spilled? No, screams the part of his mind that still remembers being a World Eater's space marine, that still recalls the glory of serving corn. Yes, whispers another part, the part that is growing stronger with each battle, each modification, each moment spent as an Ork war machine. The Orks are not so different from the World Eaters after all. They value strength and combat prowess. They respect warriors who can kill efficiently and survive to kill again. They fight for the joy of fighting itself, not for some abstract goal or distant reward. In many ways, they are more honest in their violence than the Chaos Space Marines ever were. The repairs completed, Big Stompy is sent out into battle again, and again, and again. Each engagement follows a similar pattern. The Orks point the machine at their enemies and let it loose. The pilot, knowing that refusal is impossible and that compliance brings the release of violence, throws himself into the fighting with all the skill and fury that centuries of warfare have taught him. And each time, the machine performs better, the pilot learning how to work with the crude Ork systems rather than fighting against them, discovering that there is a kind of brutal efficiency in the Ork approach to warfare that his former sophistication had lacked. The psychological transformation that accompanies this physical and tactical adaptation is profound. The pilot begins to identify less with his former self and more with his current form. He is Big Stompy. He is the Ork dread that has killed more enemies than any 3 other Orks in the WAG combined. He is the machine that even enemy commanders have learned to fear, that draws concentrated fire whenever he appears on the battlefield. The fact that he was once something else, someone else, becomes less important than what he is now. The butcher's nails continue their work, but their effect is different now. Where once they drove him toward a specific kind of violence, the methodical slaughter that pleased Khorne, now they simply amplify the general bloodlust that characterizes Ork warfare. The distinction becomes blurred. The Ork combat drugs, initially alien and wrong in his system, begin to feel natural, their effects meshing with, rather than conflicting with, his modified Space Marine biochemistry. He is becoming a hybrid, not just physically, but neurologically, a fusion of World Eater's aggression and Ork enthusiasm for violence. There are moments, usually in the aftermath of battles, when he remembers what he was. These memories are increasingly dreamlike, disconnected from his present reality. He recalls standing in formation with his brother World Eaters, before they were broken and scattered across the galaxy. He remembers the first time he killed in Khorne's name, the rush of divine approval that made the act sacred rather than simply murderous. He remembers his first internment in the Helbrute, the horror and the rage and the slow descent into madness that every pilot experiences. But these memories are fading, eroded by time and trauma, and the simple fact that his present existence demands all of his attention. Survival requires that he adapt, that he become what the Orks need him to be. And so he does, one battle at a time, one modification at a time, until the line between his past and present becomes too thin to perceive. The other Orks begin to treat him differently as his reputation grows. Where at first he was just the new dread, a curiosity to be examined and used, he becomes Big Stompy, a name spoken with respect and a kind of pride. Young orcs who want to prove themselves will seek to fight alongside him, hoping that his reputation will reflect on them. Gretchen, who are selected to service his machine, consider it an honor rather than a punishment. Even Scragnut refers to him with something approaching affection, the way a master craftsman might speak of his finest work. And the pilot, trapped in his sarcophagus but somehow less trapped than he once felt, responds to this acceptance in ways he does not fully understand. When orcs approach his machine between battles, he no longer tries to activate weapon systems in futile attempts to kill them. When Gretchen climb over his frame to perform maintenance, he suppresses the urge to crush them. He has become, in some fundamental way, part of the orc war machine, not just as a tool, but as a member of the tribe. The implications of this transformation extend beyond the merely personal. A World Eater's Helbrute represents significant resources and effort from the Chaos Space Marines. Its loss is not just the loss of a weapon, but the loss of a warrior whose experience and skills took centuries to develop. That such a loss can occur through simple capture and conversion by orcs is a strategic concern. If Helbrutes and other chaos machines can be looted and turned against their former masters, then entire categories of warfare become more dangerous for the traitor legions. Moreover, the existence of such conversions challenges some of the fundamental assumptions about chaos corruption and the loyalty of its servants. A World Eater's warrior is supposed to be utterly dedicated to Horn, his every thought shaped by worship of the blood god. That such dedication can be overwhelmed by orc modifications and conditioning suggests that the hold of chaos may not be as absolute as its followers believe. If a Helbrute pilot can be made to fight for the orcs, can other chaos warriors be similarly turned? The question is troubling for chaos forces and represents a potential vulnerability that could be exploited. From the orc perspective, the successful conversion of Big Stompy represents a triumph of their unique approach to technology and warfare. They have taken one of their enemy's most dangerous weapons and made it their own, not through sophisticated analysis or careful reverse engineering, but through brute force modification and cultural assimilation. The fact that this works, that it produces a functional and even superior war machine, validates the orc worldview in a way that no amount of theoretical discussion ever could. The orcs' resistance to chaos corruption plays a crucial role in this process. Where other races attempting similar modifications might find themselves corrupted by the chaos taint inherent in Helbrute components, the orcs remain essentially unchanged. Their psychic gestalt, the Wach field that all orcs contribute to and draw power from, acts as a shield against chaos influence. The chaos gods find that their usual methods of temptation and corruption simply do not work on greenskins, whose simple desires and straightforward thinking leave no opening for the whispered promises that ensnare more sophisticated minds. This resistance is not absolute or perfect. There are documented cases in orc history of individual orcs falling to chaos influence, usually through prolonged exposure or deliberate ritual. But these cases are rare, and the corrupted orcs typically do not survive long. Their fellow greenskins, instinctively recognizing that something is un-orky about their changed behavior, will attack and kill them without hesitation. The orc approach to dealing with chaos corruption is refreshingly direct. If it doesn't act like an orc should, it gets crumped. End of problem. This pragmatic approach to dealing with tainted equipment and captured war machines means that orcs can loot and convert items that other races would destroy out of fear of corruption. A Space Marine chapter would never dream of trying to use a captured Helbrute, not least because the corruption inherent in the machine would taint anyone who came into contact with it. The orcs, protected by their unique nature, can simply strip out the problematic bits, replace them with orc components, and use the bartered, resulting hybrid without worry. The modification of Big Stompy establishes a template that other mech boys might follow when they encounter similar situations. If one Chaos Dreadnought can be successfully looted and converted, why not more? The orcs begin actively seeking out such targets, viewing Helbrutes and other Chaos war machines not as terrifying embodiments of demonic power, but as valuable salvage waiting to be claimed. This creates a new dynamic on battlefields where Orks and Chaos forces clash, with greenskin forces sometimes prioritizing the capture of war machines over the destruction of enemy personnel. The psychological warfare implications are also significant. Imagine being a World Eater's Chaos Space Marine, advancing into battle alongside your Helbrutes, only to see one of your enemy's war machines painted in garish Ork colors, but moving with the profile and armament of a converted Helbrute. The sight would be shocking, demoralizing, a visible sign that even the might of chaos can be overwhelmed and converted by crude Xenos. For warriors whose entire identity is wrapped up in their superiority and their dedication to the Chaos Gods, such a sight strikes at the very foundation of their beliefs. From Big Stompy's perspective, such encounters would be particularly devastating. There is a battle, several months after his conversion, where the Orks clash with a different warband of World Eaters. Big Stompy finds himself advancing toward a formation that includes 2 Helbrutes, both bearing the colors and symbols of his former legion. For a moment, something in him recognizes them, remembers what it was like to fight alongside such machines rather than against them. The moment passes quickly, buried under layers of Ork conditioning and chemical-induced aggression. But it leaves a mark, a reminder that he was once something other than what he has become. The battle is brutal, as all fights involving World Eaters tend to be. Big Stompy proves superior to his former brethren, not through any inherent advantage, but through the simple fact that the Orks have given him more weapons, more armor, and a complete lack of concern for sophisticated tactics. Where the World Eaters' Helbrutes try to coordinate their attacks, to use cover and supporting fire, Big Stompy simply charges forward, all weapons blazing, trusting in his bulk and fury to carry him through. One of the enemy Helbrutes falls to concentrated rocket fire, the other is engaged in close combat and torn apart by Big Stompy's power fist and the various cutting implements the Orks have welded onto his frame. In the aftermath, as Gretchens swarm over the wreckage to salvage useful components, Big Stompy stands over the destroyed Helbrutes. Inside his sarcophagus, the pilot experiences something that might be grief, or might be relief, or might be both simultaneously. These were his brothers once, warriors who shared his dedication to Khorne, who understood the glory and horror of service to the blood god. Now they are scrap, and he is the one who destroyed them. The betrayal is complete, but the feeling passes quickly. The Orks are celebrating their victory, bellowing their war cries and arguing over who gets to claim the best bits of salvage. And Big Stompy, standing in the middle of it all, finds himself responding to their enthusiasm. Some part of him, growing stronger every day, recognizes that this is his tribe now, his warband. The World Eaters are in the past. The future is Ork. The long-term fate of Big Stompy and his pilot remains uncertain, as it must in a galaxy where warfare is constant and death is always one battle away. Ork war machines do not last forever. Eventually, accumulated damage will become too severe to repair. Eventually, the pilot's life support will fail beyond the ability of even Ork ingenuity to restore. Eventually, some enemy will get lucky and land the killing blow that even Ork armor cannot withstand. But until that day comes, Big Stompy continues to fight. In every battle, he proves the worth of the Ork approach to technology and warfare. He accumulates more modifications, more weapons, more kill tallies. His legend grows among the greenskins, the story of the Chaos Dread that was captured and turned into the killiest Ork war machine anyone had seen. And the pilot, trapped in his eternal tomb, continues his transformation from Chaos Space Marine to something entirely new, something that has no name because nothing like it has existed before. There is a certain dark poetry in his fate. He began as a loyalist space marine, sworn to protect humanity and serve the Emperor. He fell to chaos, becoming a servant of the blood god, dedicated to violence and death in Khorne's name. He was interred in a Helbrute, suffering the living death that all Chaos Dreadnought pilots endure. And now he has been captured and converted by Orks, forced to fight for a new master in a cause that he would once have found incomprehensible. Each transformation has taken him further from his original self, until nothing remains but violence itself, stripped of ideology or purpose, beyond the immediate satisfaction of killing. If there is a lesson in this story, it might be that, in the grim darkness of the far future, identity is less permanent than we like to imagine. We define ourselves by our loyalties, our beliefs, our allegiances. But all of these can be stripped away, replaced, transformed into something else entirely. The pilot thought he knew who he was. He was a world eater. He was a servant of Horn. He was a Helbrute, an engine of destruction sworn to eternal warfare. Now he is Big Stompy, an Ork dread, and perhaps that is all he will ever be for whatever remains of his existence. The Orks, in their simple and direct way, have achieved something that even the Chaos gods struggle with. They have taken a servant of Chaos and made him their own, not through corruption or temptation, but through modification and pragmatism. They have proven that even the most dedicated warrior, even the most thoroughly transformed Chaos artifact, can be repurposed if you have enough enthusiasm, enough gubbins, and enough willingness to hit things with hammers until they work the way you want. And so, Big Stompy continues to stomp across battlefields, a walking testament to the adaptability of Ork engineering and the fragility of identity in a galaxy at war. He is no longer what he was. He can never return to what he once might have been. He can only continue forward, one battle at a time, until the day when even Ork repairs and Ork enthusiasm cannot keep his damaged form functional any longer. The pilot, in his rare moments of clarity, wonders if this fate is worse than death would have been. But he no longer has the luxury of making that choice. He is property now, a weapon in the Ork's arsenal, and his purpose is to kill until he can kill no more. It is, in its own way, a kind of freedom. No, more worrying about the will of Horn or the favor of the Chaos gods. No more concern for honor or glory, or any of the abstract concepts that once drove him. Just violence, pure and simple, in service to masters who ask nothing more than that he continue to fight. In the end, perhaps the most horrifying aspect of this story is not the physical transformation that the pilot undergoes, nor even the psychological conditioning that reshapes his identity. It is the realization that, deep down, the transition from World Eater's warrior to Ork war machine is not as difficult as it should be. The World Eaters, after all, are defined by their love of violence, their need for bloodshed, their endless appetite for war. The Orks want the same things, just without the theological justifications. The pilot's transformation is less a betrayal of his nature than a revelation of what that nature truly was all along, stripped of the pretense and ideology that once gave it meaning. Big Stompy continues, his rampage across the galaxy, painted in garish colors, bristling with crude weapons, bellowing challenges in a voice that mixes mechanical distortion with Ork enthusiasm. And somewhere inside the machine, buried beneath layers of metal and madness, a consciousness that was once a space marine watches through sensors that are not quite his eyes, moves limbs that are not quite his body, and kills enemies that might have once been his allies, all in service to masters that he would once have destroyed without hesitation. This is what happens when a World Eater's Helbrute falls into Ork hands. Not death, which would be a mercy, not corruption, which implies a choice or resistance, but conversion, transformation, a forced evolution from one kind of monster into another. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, perhaps that is the most appropriate fate of all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most unique and horrifying scenarios in Warhammer 40k, lore, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We explore the darkest corners of the 41st millennium, bringing you stories of honor and horror, sacrifice and madness, glory and despair. There are endless tales waiting to be told in the vast darkness between the stars, and we are here to share them with you. Until next time, remember, In the grim darkness of the far future, identity is just another casualty of war, and even the mightiest warriors can become something entirely different than what they intended to be. The Orks care not for your past, only for how killy you can be in the present. And sometimes, that pragmatic approach reveals more truth about the nature of warfare than all the theology and ideology in the galaxy.